Hey guys, it's Selwen here, today talking about my first tank guide in a very long time, the Protection Warrior. So as a tank, your abilities are separated into 3 categories: your damaging abilities, mitigation abilities to reduce incoming damage, and your cooldowns, all molded together with your resource, which is Rage, generated through some of those damaging abilities or just auto attacks and simply by taking damage. Intercept, giving you 50 rage and serve to close the gaps between you and the enemy, also usable on allies, reflecting attacks to you. Shield Slam is going to be your main source of rage generation, slamming the target with your shield, generating 20 rage, your highest damaging ability as well in single target. Devastate, your main filler, just doing damage for free and having a small chance to reset Shield Slam CD. Revenge does pretty high cleave damage, costing 30 rage, but it's free to use after you dodge or parry an attack, also having a chance to reset Shield Slam CD. Thunderclap is your main AoE ability, generating 5 rage and once again can also reset Shield Slam cooldown. The main way to mitigate damage is gonna be through Shield Block, increasing our block chance to 100%, reducing incoming melee damage by 40%. Costs 15 rage and has 2 charges. Ignore Pain is your second way to mitigate damage, costing 20 to 60 rage, creating a sort of barrier on you to soak up any incoming damage. 90% to be exact, on a limited amount. More rage consumed, the more it will absorb. But more attack power and versatility will also affect how much damage it soaks up. Shield Reflection is your main way to mitigate spell damage, reflecting weaker spells and reducing all magical damage taken by 50%. Your main cooldowns is Shield Wall, reducing all damage taken by 40% for 8 seconds, Last Stand, increasing your HP for 30% for 15 seconds, and finally, Demoralizing Shout, placing a debuff on all nearby targets, reducing your incoming damage by 20%. You also have an offensive type of cooldown, Battle Cry, making all of your abilities critical strike. As for passives, include Deep Wounds, a bleeding dot placed from Devastate and Revenge, and your Mastery Critical Block, increasing your overall chance to block, and well, Critical Block, reducing twice the amount, so to 80%, and increases your attack power as well. Your artifact ability is Neltharion's Fury, damaging all nearby targets in flames as you channel, but allows you to use mitigation abilities while doing so, plus critical blocks every single melee attack. With that done, let's talk talents. So as a prot warrior, your build is not gonna drastically change from what you should be using in raids or Mythic Plus or general multi-target scenarios, but just some different choices here or there, but is mostly personal choices and also depending on your gear. So for raiding scenarios, here in the first tier for raiding in general doesn't really matter all that much. Both Shockwave and Stormbolt are a stun, which are rarely usable in a raid setting unless in an ad fight and they aren't immune to it. Warbringer will add damage to intercept and a stun, but will only damage on stunnable targets. So in general, for raiding, all are pretty much useless unless in very niche situations. On tier 2, Inspiring Presence is overall the best choice in this tier, giving a buff to all the group and raid, healing them for 3% of all the damage done. This can stack up to a pretty high healing amount depending on the raid size, amazing for raiding. Impending Victory, replacing our Victory Rush to no longer need to kill a target to be usable, making it usable in raiding scenarios, but it costs rage and takes up a global cooldown, so generally not worth it. Next tier is more focused around damage. Renewed Fury is generally the best in raging you after you use Ignore Pain, increasing your overall damage by 10%. Overall, the most suited for raiding. Avatar works if you really want a DPS cooldown for whatever the reason, or you know there's gonna be some rooting or snares since it gets you out of them, so again, a niche choice. Next is entirely optional and it's gonna depend on the encounter. Bounding Stride for better mobility with your heroic leaps, Crackling Thunder for easier AoE range on your Thunderclap, or Warlord's Challenge, which also gives you a niche use, reducing the cooldown of Berserker Rage that makes you immune to fears and whatnot, so if there's something like that in the fight, make sure to take it, but also, while active, makes your taunt have no cooldown and targets taunted move 50% faster to you. So there's an interesting way you can use this talent to make bosses move faster. A fight where this was particularly useful was Avatar in Tomb of Sargeras, making the boss move away faster from the lava, save the group and some extra damage. So I'm sure you can find similar situations like that in Antorus. Next will come to be about Devastator and Indomitable. Indomitable will just increase your HP by 20% and how effective Ignore Pain by also 20%, so it's a pretty good passive choice, overall giving you more survivability. Now Devastator will remove your Devastate filler and instead making it a passive, hitting through your auto attacks, still doing about the same damage and the same chance on Shield Slam's resets, but also gives you 5 rage. Plus, since it's a completely passive, opens you a global cooldown window to use your other abilities. Overall, it will provide a much higher rage generation since it will be constantly hitting on the background, giving you more shield slams and rage, scaling pretty goddamn well with haste. That said, for beginners, it might feel weird since you lose your filler, so I recommend for you to test it around and see if it works for you. In the end, it can be the best choice, but if you really hate the playstyle, go for the others since they will still work perfectly fine. Never Surrender never really beats the other two though. Next tier, Vengeance is great by making your Revenge reduce the cost of Ignore Pain by 35%, and Ignore Pain reduce the cost of Revenge by 35% also. Now that can proc off Revenge free proc, making it a pretty good addition to reduce the cost of your next Ignore Pain at 60 rage for maximum effect to about 40, which will then fuel your revenges. Although you mostly want to use them when they are free, making part of this talent almost worthless, but still works fine for what it does. More on that later. Booming Voice can also work really nicely, granting your demoralizing shout 60 rage on demand. The shout itself already grants you Might of the Raikul, increasing the rage generation through shield slams and thunderclap. So not only functions as a defensive cooldown, but also an ability to generate extra rage. Combined with the talent, it is a nice option for on-demand rage, particularly great on fights where you need to react to something quick or anything really. It will also increase the damage done to the target, which is great. It's also your go-to with a tier 21, which makes Vengeance obsolete. And final tier, Anger Management is overall the best choice. For every 10 rage you spend, will reduce the cooldown on your Battle Cry, Last Stand, Shield Wall and Demoralizing Shout. So not only giving you more survivability through your defensive cooldowns, but also more damage due to Battle Cry and even Demoralizing Shout if combined with Booming Voice or just naturally due to that trait again, making it a great combo. More rage you get, the faster your cooldowns get reduced, which equals more rage, which will equal better and more mitigation. Plus, with a tier 21 that removes the cooldown of Shield Slam while Battle Cry is up, makes it a no-brainer choice. Vengeance can also harm this talent somewhat, since reducing the cost of rage is actually making this talent less effective. One more reason which I recommend Booming Voice. Heavy Repercussions is okay for your Shield Slam to increase the duration of your shield block by 1 second, but only worthwhile on heavy melee-centric fights and if you really need the extra block duration. Don't bother with this, however, if you have the tier 21. As for Mythic Plus, like I said, not much will change. Shockwave is practically a must here. Inspiring Presence will still work great, but you can actually do some pretty cool things with Safeguard, transferring 30% of the damage taken on an ally that you just intercepted, meaning you can actually intercept, for an example, your healer or a weaker member in your group to help him survive some sort of mechanic, like some soaking or even a bursting stack. It's really a niche choice, but when it works, it is quite cool. Tier 3, Renewed Fury will stay for that damage increase. Best Surf Cold you might think is really good for the extra damage on Revenge, but to make it worthwhile you're gonna need to have constant 4 to 5 targets. Even then, what's better, extra damage on just one ability or 10% overall? Unless you really need the burst, you be the one to decide. Next is whatever you prefer, mobility or easier thunderclaps. As for the Devastator, the idea stays. On tier 6, I personally prefer Booming Voice for overall more rage on demand and damage, but both work perfectly fine. But remember, if you have the tier 21, go for Booming Voice. Into the fray, for every target you get, you gain 3% haste up to 5 targets. On paper is great, as like I said, haste is pretty good to you, but again, unless it's steaming, can be quite rare to take this talent to its full potential, and the other choices are overall safer, but it can technically work. And last tier stays the same. Ravager is nice, but anger management will overtake it in damage anyway. Ravager can work if you really need to parry for some reason, or if you really want it because it looks cool, but again, anger management will provide with more damage and basically everything else. Now with that then, what we're gonna do is talk about your abilities in depth. To do that, I'm gonna separate it into categories. First, going over your overall abilities in single target and multi-targets, what's your general priority at any given time on how to generate rage, aggro, and deal damage. Then how to properly mitigate damage, then finalize with cooldowns and overall utility. So let's just start with, like I said, your damaging abilities, and then talk about some of the talent changes, differences like Devastator. Protection Warrior in general can be quite spammy. Once you get decent enough gear, there will be always something to collect. So when starting up a fight and you charge like a badass or, well, intercept, in general, your priority to generate rage will be on Shield Slam. You want to be using that ability on cooldown. Remember, both of your mitigation abilities aren't on a global cooldown, so you can click on them whenever, but more on that afterwards. So feel free to spam that Shield Slam. The reason to spam it is because a lot of your abilities will have a chance to reset its cooldown, like I went over in the introduction. So for an example, Devastator, which happens on the pack round, will be your most valuable source of Shield Slam's cooldown resets, so keep track of those refreshes. That's why Devastator is such a powerful talent. Your second priority will then be on Thunderclap. Like it will have a chance to reset Shield Slam CD, which is great, but also generates rage, which is what you want for more mitigation. But also applies a debuff on the target, reducing the damage that you take by 1%, stacking 5 times. So you want that debuff up at all times. Using the ability on cooldown when your Shield Slam is unusable is a safe way to achieve that. In multi-target scenarios, however, such as in Mythic Plus dungeons or ads, Thunderclap might jump in priority just so you can grab aggro of all mobs easily when starting up, but after that Shield Slam should go back to your priority number 1, unless it's skittish and you really need the extra AoE damage to keep up the aggro. After that will come your revenges, free procs. They will come quite regularly as you often dodge and parry, so just use them as you get them, as long as Shield Slam and Thunderclap is on cooldown, but especially Shield Slam, since Revenge also has a chance to reset its cooldown, so make sure of that. The only reason you would want to use Revenge outside of its free proc is if you with the Revengeance talent and have the reduction buff up, or when there's nothing you can click and you're not needing any sort of mitigation at the moment, or if you just want to deal more damage and you're not worrying about surviving, dumping excess rage in the process. So easier content, or if you off tanking and just want to deal more damage. Although in those situations you should be looking to prepare your ignore pains for when it is your turn to taunt, but more on that later. In multi-target scenarios that idea stays, but since Revenge cleaves, it can become your hardest hitting ability in Mythic Plus, but don't abuse it too much, as you might need the rage for Ignore Pain or Shield Block, so as long as you are in a safe position, feel free to use it without the proc. Especially great with the skittish affix, you might have to use more frequently Revenges anyway to get higher threat. Besides that, you don't technically need to use it, but if you can, do it as it helps with the overall damage and might give a Shield Slam proc in the process. And that's essentially how you can effectively build rage and aggro. It's mostly spamming all the things and making sure Shield Slam is on cooldown before you spam all the things. If you're not playing with Devastator, you're gonna have to actively click your Devastate ability, but it's quite easy. Just use it when Shield Slam and Thunderclap is on cooldown and have no proc of Revenge, and hopefully you get a Shield Slam proc to reset its cooldown. It basically gives you another button to click, but all the rest stays the same. Now, in the middle of that, you have to obviously mitigate incoming damage. That's your main job as a tank, is to soak or prevent as much damage as possible. The main ways to do that is with Shield Block and Ignore the Pain. Now, Shield Block is relatively easy. You have 2 charges that last for 6 seconds on about 10 to 12 second cooldown, reduced by haste. So the idea with it is just to have it pretty much all the time. There's not a lot of thinking going into it. It only costs 15 rage, so you can immediately and should use it right after that initial intercept, allowing you to prevent some damage while you're building rage for your Ignore Pain, which is gonna mitigate much more damage. But pretty much keep track of it and have it up as much as you can. Depending on your haste, this will be done easier, but you should only have very small periods of time that it isn't up, so not much to worry. With that said, there's some exceptions, but more on that in a bit. So now that you're blocking some damage, you need to build rage quickly to use your Ignore Pain to mitigate even more damage. Ignore Pain is mostly worthwhile to use at 60 rage, but it can be used below if you really need to, especially since they stack and refresh on top of each other, but do try to only use it at 60 rage. Between your Shield Slams, Devastators and taking damage overall, it will be pretty easy to reach that point, so when you get there, use it to soak up any incoming damage. Now, it's not 100%, but 90% with a set amount of damage that you can absorb, that you want to make sure that is pretty much all the time, just like your Shield Block, with again some exceptions that I'll talk about in a bit. To achieve that is all gonna be about your rage generation, so that set of priorities will have a big toll on how much damage you can mitigate. The safest course you can take is reach 60 rage, you use it, and that will be that. It works and keeps you safely mitigating damage, but if you can, play and plan around with it, like storing up some rage for 2 Ignore Pains and just leaving on shield blocks to prepare ahead of time for some big hit coming your way. Like I said, Ignore Pain stacks on top of each other, so you can actively use them to prepare yourself when it's your turn to taunt or big damage is coming. That somewhat follows for shield block ability as well, saving up 1 charge for when you know a big ability is coming your way or a lot of fast hitting melee attacks. But that's gonna depend on the encounter, so prepare yourself ahead of time. Also remember that some attacks cannot be blocked whatsoever, but for that you're gonna have to study the encounter. Ignore Pain pretty much works for everything. It is also worth to remember Ignore Pain does not count as active mitigation, unlike Shield Block, a reminder that on bosses like the last boss in Naltharian's Lair, which requires you to have 1 up to not get pushed back. Another thing, it is advisable to only use Ignore Pain at 90% or below HP or if near cap of rage. And you should if you have the Lego bracers which heal you when you use rage, but in the end it doesn't really matter all that much to you, you will soak damage anyway, so I'll leave that decision up to you. It's mostly about optimization, mostly to not surprise your healers with big spikes of damage when your Ignore Pain is breached. If it's breached. But that's something you're gonna have to learn and adapt by yourself. For the most part nowadays, it's easy to use it to prevent damage in almost all situations, and you're gonna be safe with those constant uses of Ignore Pain, but something you should know anyway. If you're with Vengeance, like I said before, you mostly want to take advantage of those revenge free procs that you're gonna use anyway, so remember that when you do, you don't need to use Ignore Pain at 60 rage, but around 40 for maximum effect. If you have any extra rage, feel free to use your revenge anyway, just to prepare your next Ignore Pain to cost less, and you can essentially feed off each other. Now that's for melee attacks. For magic damage can be quite different. Ignore Pain still gonna work, but Shield Block is gonna be mostly useless. Now, you still want to use it because while it's up, it increases your Shield Slam damage by 30%, and it's out of a global cooldown, so just use it anyway. But in those situations, remember your spell reflections. On bosses, the reflect itself might not work, but in trash packs it will, so you can do some pretty cool things with it, plus reduces all magical damage by 50%. The cooldown is much longer than, say, Shield Block, so you need to be careful when using it. Save it if you know something big is coming, or just use it freely on spell users during trash packs. Again, it's gonna depend on the fight. So, just like before, just a lot of spammy. As for your cooldowns, Last Stand and Shield Wall, they are pretty self-explanatory. It's just gonna allow you to soak up larger hits, so save them in moments you are or gonna get hit hard, or there's a big trash pack pool going on. As for Demoralizing Shot, all I can say is, don't be afraid to use it. The damage reduction is great and you can save it for specific moments, but pretty much you want to actually use it on cooldown. Due to anger management, you're gonna have it quite frequently, and you're mostly gonna use it for rage generation. Between the 60 from Booming Voice and then Might of the Raikul trait is gonna overflow you with rage, allowing you to go for more Ignore Pains and some revenges if you're feeling fancy. So again, don't be afraid to use it. All that rage on itself is just gonna reduce its cooldown, so it's a pretty funny combo. Best times to use it is when you want a low rage, so after an Ignore Pain or something like that. Don't ever use it above 60 or 70 rage, so you don't overcap. That's about it. Only save it if you know there's something specific coming and you really need that 20% damage reduction and the extra rage for Ignore Pains. Battle Cry is gonna work in a similar way. You mostly can use it at the beginning of fights to make that initial Shield Slam, Thunderclap and Revenge more worthwhile, especially in skittish scenarios. But like Demoralizing Shot, don't be afraid to use it. Battle Cry is on a 1 minute cooldown, but with anger management makes it go down to practically half, so use it as you get it, as long as your abilities are ready to be used with it. With the tier 21, you're gonna have to plan it a little bit better, since it removes the Shield Slam CD, so you're gonna start using it to start off build up rage quickly, so it can be either during a heavy moment in a fight to build up some juicy Ignore Pains, or in preparation for it. You still want to use it on cooldown pretty much, but again, if you know something big is coming, save it for then, alright? As for Neltharian's Fury, well, half of it is a defensive cooldown, half is a DPS one, but mostly you're gonna use it to once again soak up damage. It is a guaranteed critical blocks while it channels, so 1, it's useless against magic damage, and 2, it's perfect to soak up a lot of targets at once, especially ones that have nasty auto attacks or just that attack very fast is where this ability will shine. So in bosses you can use it during hard hitting abilities if it's melee, during trash packs, save it when there's multiple melee enemies to prevent a lot of damage. It also damages, which is great, plus remember that when you critical block, one of your traits, Scales of Earth, has a chance to increase your armor by 30% and deal more damage, so there's also that. And remember, you can still use Ignore Pain while you channel. Shield Block is mostly worthless here since you are guaranteeing critical blocking. So you can also use it in moments where Shield Block is on CD and you cannot use Ignore Pain, and sort of like an emergency mitigation while the cooldowns get back up since it's free to use. In terms of utility and anything extra, well, there's the intercept plate that I talked about during your talents, but also you can use it for extra rage by using it on your fellow tank and you're also helping him reduce some damage taken or a nearby player when safe. Remember to make good uses out of your shockwave during trash packs, alright, especially if something nasty is coming your way and you can prevent it. Your Berserker Rage to make you immune to fears, and also remember that Thunderclap slows and you have a lot of mobility with your heroic leaps and intercepts. So in Mythic Pluses, you can easily kite by using your Thunderclap and then just leaping away. Pretty useful and sometimes a must for certain affixes. Also don't forget your your heroic throw to make some cool pulls using the line of sight technique, so hiding behind a corner for a spellcaster to come to you, or just grab aggro of those nasty range enemies that you cannot get close to. It has no cooldown and generates high threat, so you can actually spam it if you really cannot hit it and you still want the aggro. And that covers it all. As for stats, and then to wrap up, so as protection warrior, you're gonna highly benefit from haste, especially if you play with Devastator. Faster auto attacks will equal more of those procs, which will equal more rage, plus reduced shield slam and shield block CD, which equals more rage and more mitigation, and overall reduction of global cooldowns, which is also great since there's a lot of spam going on. Being able to click buttons faster is a welcome bonus for more rage and in turn mitigation again. After that is versatility, a very good stat for tanks in general, increasing your overall damage and decreasing damage taken, so pretty self-explanatory, making your ignore pains bigger as well. Mastery is okay, the chance of block is almost useless because haste will allow for more shield blocks from the ability, so it's whatever, still good but not that special. The critical block chance is indeed quite nice since they can happen from those shield blocks, but still they are only useful for melee targets, so isn't all that worth chase it unless you can focus on mastery specific gear for melee centric fights. Crit is okay, it allows for more damage done and higher parry chance, but you never really want to go after it. All in all, protection can be quite fun. This new Legion interpretation of protection is very spammy, and the ignore pain mechanic might be a deal breaker for some or awesome for others. But you do feel strong in every area, be it damage, defensives, mobility, you do have it all, and for me, they will always be the king of tanks. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope it helps. Like and subscribe for more videos like this. Have a fantastic day, everyone, and I'll see you all next time. See ya!